The Hanami. The Hanami is a Japanese traditional event once a year at the end of March, where Japanese are watching and admiring the beauty of the cherry blossom. We are here in a park, Seido Co, which is very close from the company, for a short Seido talk. Just because the Hanami is a very good opportunity to have a beer and talk about our experiences. So today, just to make the connection with the end of the last Seido talk, just like to talk about what it is like to practice martial arts in Japan, what it is like to practice Budo here, and what's different with the practice in the West. So Yannick is the Judo teacher. He's been practicing for 15 years and has several experiences in Japan. Jean-François here has been practicing for more than 10 years, Kendo, Seido, and 3 years of practice in Japan. I have a bit more than 15 years experience, 13 of them in Japan, which basically means that I've practiced a lot more in Japan than in the West actually. Well, it's very different practicing here, so it would be very interesting to share our experiences and see if there are differences between Aikido, Judo, Kendo and Seido. So let's talk about our experiences in Japan, and we're going to start with Jean-François when I'm giving my mic to Yannick.
So I started practicing in Japan about 7 years ago. At first, and for the first year, only in local dojos near the place I was living. After that first year, I had the opportunity to come again in Japan to study at the university. So for that year, for that second year, I could practice at my university, which was Meiji University in Tokyo. I was part of the university club. And finally, for the third year, which was last year, I could practice at my work for a year because we had a dojo in the company, so it was really convenient. And of course, I was also training in the dojos in the area because it was in Kumamoto, and Kumamoto is really renowned for its kendo, so you can practice basically everywhere with really good people. And now I am back in Tokyo, and fortunately Seido's CEO's father-in-law is actually 7th Dan in Kendo, so I have the great opportunity to train with him at his own dojo 2 or 3 times a week, so I can still go on with that.
Well, I'm Yannick. I've been practicing now for, I think, 10 years. I started 10 years ago. My experience is definitely in 2 cities only. The main one, Tokyo, and the second one is Tenri. Tenri is very famous for the university, so I got the opportunity to get there in order to train a couple of times. And in Tokyo, I've been to several different dojos, different sizes, and definitely I think it's gonna be like really interesting stories for you guys to learn about it.
So I've started practicing at the Hombu Dojo 13 years ago. So the Hombu Dojo of Aikido is in Shinjuku, it's a center of Tokyo. I've practiced in a few small dojos as well, but my main dojo was and is still the Hombu Dojo. I also practiced in a small dojo in Osaka, and as well as in Kyoto with Okamoto Yoko, who is quite famous in the West, I believe. Well, a few other small dojos in which I've practiced here. With my job, I also have a few experiences visiting dojos for interviews or for business reasons. So I've had the opportunity to see many of different atmospheres here in Japan.
Regarding practice, you have differences between the practice in France and the practice in Japan, mostly because in France a lot of people start practicing at older age. In Japan, most practitioners, they start around 5, maybe 10, so they have a lot of time and their body is still able to learn a lot of things naturally in the beginning, so they actually do a lot of exercise, a lot of volume, and they practice a lot, and it's not really technical. They correct everything, of course, but kind of slowly, little by little. In France, we really insist a lot on the techniques, on how you have to do it. We repeat the movements really precisely. In Japan, it's not the case. That's the main difference, the most striking difference. You just practice a lot of techniques. And the second difference is that you have a lot more teachers available, a lot more high-ranked practitioners to teach to other people or to teach to beginners. So a lot of the practice is actually just practicing together. For Kendo, it's like Jigeko, because you have a lot of people that can teach you interesting things just by practicing in pairs. In France, you don't have many high-ranked practitioners, so the role of the teacher is really important in France. He has to teach really precisely how to do the movements and so on, because he doesn't have time to teach that by just natural fighting. That's the two main differences that I would underline for practicing in Japan. Regarding the kata in Kendo, also one difference that is actually at the advantage of French practice, I think, is that in Japan most practitioners, they don't know kata at all, or really badly. In France, we practice in general. It's not the case for every dojo I know, but we practice kata a lot more and a lot more seriously. That, I have to say, like high-ranked teachers, usually they are really good at kata, no problem. They know it really precisely. If you practice in front of them, they will tell you every little details that you failed. But in general, they don't know kata really well. Even at my level, I can teach kata to Japanese practitioners the same level as me, because they don't know it as well as me, which is surprising for Japan. But that's another difference. Maybe one of the reasons for that is that most practitioners, as I said, start at a really young age, and they're kind of trained for competition. At least competition is a really big part of Kendo practice, because you have competition from the youngest age to university, and then after that you have the national competitions for adults and so on. So they always compete. It's really big part of the practice. So they don't really stress the practice of kata, whereas in the West and in France in particular, most people, they come to Kendo to find something they were looking for before, I don't know, for something maybe a little more spiritual. So the calm practice of the kata is more important in France, and actually for highest level it's really important to practice kata. I'm absolutely convinced of that because of the practice I was taught. And even in Japan, high-ranked sensei would probably say the same. It's just that the practice of kata just comes really later in your life.
Well, for Judo, like Jean-François said, Judo is an Olympic sport. So definitely here, when you train, most of the time you don't do techniques anymore. It's just roundaries. We do roundary. If you go to university, you will do roundary and roundary again. And this is the main difference. Because in France, when you go to a judo club, most of the time we are going to start with techniques first, and we're going to finish with the roundaries. Here, it's going to be uchikomi, and then roundary, and sometimes a bit of technique. But yeah, definitely it makes a big difference for sure.
In Aikido, I'd say it's pretty much the same. Japan is not very technical. Contrary to popular belief, Japan is not very technical. Well, in Aikido, it's not that much practiced at school. There is no competition, so it's not because there is a focus in competition that practitioners know not many techniques. But let's take an example. You're a Shodan, for example. You're just first dan, and you know what, 50, 100 of techniques maybe, and you've been practicing for what 6, 7, 8 years, 10 years maybe. Well, in Japan you can be Shodan in 2 or 3 years with 20 or 25 techniques. So what we see as the black belt in the West and in France, the level we imagine, the responsibility we link to the fact of being black belt, well, it's not that at all in Japan. You can just practice 2-3 years. You're not very good, you don't know many techniques, but you're practicing, you're coming 3 times, 4 times a week. So at some point you're gonna get your black belt anyway, whether you're good or not, doesn't matter. Well, that's question of grading, examinations, that's complete other question. So the idea is to say that most of the practitioners, Japanese practitioners, what they focus on is practicing, feeling, doing the same technique over and over again to try to have this specific technique working okay. And they don't really focus on variants, other version of the same technique. So what you would consider as, well, I know Ikkyo, I know this technique in 10 different situations. Probably Japanese practitioner would know it in 2 or 3 situations only, but they might be able to do it better than you do. So the collecting techniques and this idea of knowing many techniques makes you better, it's really an idea that I don't know where it comes from, but is specific to the West. In Japan, it's not about how many techniques you know, it's about how you do the few techniques you know. And the teachers, they're trying to teach you that. They want to teach you principles. Shisei, mine is pretty bad, for example. They would teach you how to enter the Irimi principle in Aikido, or really principles, but not techniques. And they're going to teach you very few techniques in which you can study those principles. And this relation you have with the teacher is more about making you not specifically better at Aikido in general, but gives you a better way to use your body, to have a better shisei, to well, it's something you really should experience by yourself if you have the opportunity to come to Japan. You'll see that in a class you're probably going to do 3, 4, maybe 5 techniques in 1 hour top. You won't do more than 5 techniques in an hour. Sometimes always with the same partner for 1 hour, because you start knowing him, feeling him after 10, 20, 30 minutes, and then you can stop thinking about syncing yourself with your partner and practicing without your mind parasiting your practice by thinking too much. So I think the way Japanese see martial art practice, especially in Budo, is more a question of feeling, practicing, same technique over and over again, than collecting a number of techniques and becoming a technician. It's really about practicing. And they don't talk. They don't talk about religion, they don't talk about philosophical principles or anything. They just teach you, show you the technique, you do it for 10-15 minutes, and everything is based on the concept of you have to practice if you want to get better. 2 hours of practice in France is probably equal to 30 minutes of practice in Japan, top. The first time I came at the Hombu Dojo, 1 hour class, it was like 1 hour. I'm used to seminars and 2, 3, 4 hours of practice. I was dead after 1 hour, because 1 hour with the prof not talking, showing like 4 techniques, means you practice 58 minutes in an hour. And it's really different than a seminar you could do in France of 4 or 6 hours, when you're going to practice 1 hour or 2 hours in one day, and all the time would be talking and discussing the techniques and everything. So I think that's one of the biggest difference of practice in Japan, is that it's all about practice, not discussing, not techniques, not collecting anything, not ego, not talks on the mats. Who is right? Who has the better techniques or anything? Practice, practice, practice.
For me, it's particularly true when it comes to Iaido. Because in Iaido in France, I always think we talk too much. We talk a lot. The teachers talk a lot in the lesson. They want to adjust the technique a lot. In Japan, it's not the case. Also because the global level is higher, so they don't need to talk that much. But it's also a different way of seeing the practice. And in Japan, in Iaido, I remember I was really surprised, because you would get sweaty much faster than in France. In France, you don't have time to get sweaty. Every time you do the kata 3 times, the teacher stopped the class and you have to go through an explanation again. In Iaido in France, sometimes you just practice all the kata over and over again for 1 hour without any stop, and that's a really big difference. That's true. Also, regarding the practice in Kendo, I wanted to go to actually say pretty much the same thing as you said for Aikido. Practice is shorter. It's really rare to have 2 hours of lesson. It's shorter, but technique is not big. It's not a big thing. Nobody will ask you to know many techniques. Usually, it's really not the point. You have to have your basics right. That's the most important thing, and that's also a big difference with France. As for Aikido, they don't care if you know so many techniques that you can use in fighting. They want the basics to be right, so you have to be able to hit men properly with all the good things in place. And when you know that, all the other techniques, it comes naturally. You will develop it while fighting. They don't teach you that. They teach you the basics. That's also a very big difference.